Hello and welcome to GameSag. Sometimes games get sequels or entries into the series that, for one reason or another, you just stop thinking about. So in this episode, I'm going to take a look at some games that'll make you think, oh yeah, that's right, haven't thought about that one in a while. If you've ever thought about them at all, that is. Anyway, let's get started. Anyone remember Rast Saga, which was released by Taito in 1987? Of course you do. This was a really cool arcade game featuring side-scrolling hack-and-slash action. You spend some time outside killing enemies, and then you're inside working your way to the boss of that level. The arcade isn't an easy game, though it does have some cool music. The port to the Master System is pretty cool, and it even retains the fun. This was followed up the next year with Rast Saga 2, known in some areas as Nastar Warrior. Nastar is just an anagram of Rastan, by the way. While it's still a side-scrolling hack-and-slash, it really isn't anything like the original game at all. The graphics look extremely, well, derpy. Durr, look at me! The levels only scroll left to right, and all of the charm of the original game is completely gone. This one doesn't do anything to bring its own charm either, as everything about the gameplay can best be described as clunky. The music can be decent, but it doesn't save this goofy game. The ports to the Genesis and PC Engine didn't do anything to help people appreciate this one. For the longest time, I thought this was all she wrote for the series, but there's actually a third game. It's called Warrior Blade, Rast Saga Episode 3, and it was released to the arcades in Japan in 1991. This one is more of a beat-em-up in the style of Golden Axe, but like that one, it's also still a hack-and-slash. It uses two screens side by side as Taito was known to do in the arcades from time to time. You choose from 3 different characters in this one. Of course, there's Rastan, who attacks with his sword. Then there's Dewey, the ninja dude. He's pretty fast and actually kind of fun to use. My main problem with him, I think, is that he's just not Rastan, and this is a Rastan game. Lastly, there's Sophia with her whip. Unfortunately, she's not fun to use, as her whip is really weak and it feels like it takes forever to murder enemies. You can sometimes choose which stage you want to go to next, and each stage will grant you some special increase in one of your abilities. Only by defeating the first 4 areas are you granted access to the final stage, which itself is pretty short. Each of the main areas are pretty meaty in length though. There's enough variety here and it doesn't become tiresome or boring. As you slice your way through the enemies, they'll sometimes drop stuff for you to pick up, like coins and stuff for points, but occasionally life refills and temporary power-ups for your weapons. You can also summon an old wizard dude who will walk around with you. Sometimes, seemingly whenever the mood hits him, he'll freeze all of the enemies on screen for you to hack down into pieces. He won't stay with you in boss fights though. Along with your jump and attack buttons, there's a third desperation button that you can use. This allows you to harm the enemies in your immediate vicinity all around you. Of course, it does cost you some life, so be careful and only use it when you need to. The graphics are really well done for a 1991 game. There's plenty of detail on both the characters and the backgrounds. Also, the animation tends to be pretty good. There really aren't any visual effects here that we hadn't seen before on home consoles by that time, but what it does well. The sound is also pretty good, with voices in multiple languages saying who knows what. The music works, but of course it doesn't sound as epic as the first game did. Overall, this is a really good game. In fact, if it allowed 3 players simultaneously and had some cool magic to earn and use, it'd be on par with Sega's Golden Axe, The Revenge of Death Adder, which would appear in arcades the next year. Even so, this one is up there with it in terms of fun and playability. It was brought home on the Taito Memories 2 Geekon disc in Japan for the PlayStation 2.
Help me. Help me.
This wasn't the only forgotten Rastan sequel though. There's also Warrior Blade, Rastan vs. Barbarian, which was released in Japan for the GameCube and PlayStation 2. It doesn't even have a title screen. How sad is that? Anyway, I'm playing the GameCube version here. This one was developed by Sapphire in 2003, and honestly, it has nothing to do with Rastan. However, in Japan, Taito was the publisher, so they added Rastan's name to it, hoping to increase sales. Elsewhere, this game is simply called Barbarian with no tie-ins to Rastan at all. It was also released on the Xbox, but only in Europe, and only the PlayStation 2 version was released in North America. This one is a rather mediocre fighting game that's based on a similar concept to Power Stone 2. Up to 4 players can fight at the same time, and there are things to grab in the levels, though not much in the way of power-ups. During the versus matches, you can also add some thugs to fight all of you during the stage as well. When there's 8 characters fighting, the action definitely gets slower and the frame rate drops, but if you and your friends are bored, this might be okay if there's literally nothing else to play at all. As a single player game, it's far worse, as the quest mode is absolutely ridiculous. Even in the very first fight, it just destroys you. There's no gradual difficulty curve, it just comes at you balls to the wall. The blocking doesn't work well, your attacks are slow, the CPU barely gives you enough time to attack, and is absolutely no fun at all. Again, this is the first fight. Only masochists are going to want to stick around and keep trying, so why would you want to reduce your potential audience? The visuals are sharp and in 480p, but there's no widescreen mode. If you're doing a one-on-one battle, then it usually runs at 60 frames per second. What really sucks is that sometimes the foreground graphics can obscure your fighters. Who doesn't love that? The music really isn't worth mentioning, so I won't, even though I just did. Anyway, feel free to go right back to forgetting about this one. The next one up is a sequel that I knew existed for a long time, but for whatever reason I just never got around to playing it. I thought I'd played it, but when I powered it up it was all new to me. Fighting Vipers by Sega was released to the arcades in late 1995 and on the Saturn in 1996. This is the Saturn version. It's a 3D fighting game very similar to Virtua Fighter, except that you're in a small caged arena. You can actually break some of the barriers if a powerful enough attack is used. As you battle, certain areas of your body will take more damage and your armor and clothes can fly off. This leaves you a bit more vulnerable. You can tell by the body icon that's near your power bar if any part of your body is in danger. Overall, it's a pretty fun game. Aside from all of the characters appearing in Sega's Fighters Megamix on the Saturn, that seemed to be about it for Fighting Vipers, at least from my perspective. However, Fighting Vipers 2 was released in the arcades in 1998 and came home to the Dreamcast in 2001, but only in Japan and Europe. The gameplay here is exactly the same as it was in the first game. However, 2 more characters have been added. There's this dude with a BMX strapped to his back named Charlie. I'm not sure how he's able to be so agile, as even the lightest BMX is large and cumbersome. He'd probably do better as a fighter if he just left that propped up against a wall somewhere during the fight. Then there's Emmy. She's got some kind of computer contraption strapped to herself. There's also a couple of unlockable characters. It's fun learning the moves of these new fighters. The breakable armor aspect is still in here, though it seems ever so slightly tougher to pull off. You also have the same gauges by your life bar indicating how damaged you are. You can also still bash an opponent through a barrier, which is pretty fun. Supposedly, this game is pretty much identical to the arcade version. It might be a bit too close though, as I think the home version could use a unique ending for each character. Instead, all you get is a credit scroll. Visually, this game is outstanding, and I mainly say that because I just got done playing the first game on the Saturn. Regardless, it's still sharp and quite colorful. It certainly looks better than the PlayStation 2 version of the first Fighting Vipers game. I like how this stage, which was also in the first game, is now on fire. The music is new and still good, with a couple of throwbacks to the first game. The new stuff here is mostly good, and overall I'd say it's better than most of the tunes in the original game, though that one sounds pretty great as well. All in all, this is a very fun fighting game. It was going to be released in North America, but Sega noped out. That makes me sad, as this would be a good one to have in any Dreamcast owner's library. Crazy Taxi was released by Sega in the arcades in 1999 and on the Dreamcast in 2000. Almost everyone knows what this game is about. You have a taxi and you pick up one of the several hundred people around the small city who need a ride right now, damn it! They get in and you take them where they need to go, and they need to be there ASAP, and they're just not having your slow ass. But if you get them there before their timer runs out, you make money, and you make even more money if you can get them there faster than they were expecting. You might also get a few more seconds tacked onto the game timer, which will let you play longer. Learning the city definitely helps. This game is pretty stupid, and I love how nonsensical it can be. Nobody takes themselves less seriously than Sega. Now, you may or may not know about the sequel, Crazy Taxi 2, which was released exclusively on the Dreamcast in 2001. This time, you're driving a cab in an area inspired by New York City. As a result, I feel it's kind of more boring to look at as a video game. I never liked driving around New York City in pretty much any game, though I do love the place in real life. Anyway, you're still picking people up who are willing to pay you hundreds upon hundreds of dollars to take them places they could walk to in less than 5, maybe 10 minutes. You can now pick up multiple passengers at once and also hop if you need it. Otherwise, it's basically more of the same, which isn't a bad thing. There were some Crazy Taxi games released on portable systems over the years, but did you know that there was a Crazy Taxi 3? Yeah, it came out for the Xbox in 2002 and eventually landed on PC in 2004, and it's hardly ever mentioned. There was also an arcade version that lost the number 3 from the title. You can select the West Coast to drive around the San Francisco-like city with the same cabbies from the first game. However, this time, you also have the Crazy Jump at your disposal, which can come in helpful. You can also pick up multiple fares at once now. I'll be honest, I don't like doing this much because they don't pay very well at all. You can also choose Small Apple, which is the New York City inspired area, along with the same cabbies which were in the second game. It's now presented at night, which does make it slightly more interesting. One thing to note is that the new area that was in the first Dreamcast game isn't here, nor is the Around Apple area from the second game. Anyway, new to this one is Glitter Oasis, which is inspired by Las Vegas. You also get 4 brand new cabbies to choose from. This one is also at night because who the hell wants to see Las Vegas during the day? This area is really big, and you'll be driving in the city and even way outside of it. In fact, some of the places might be a bit too barren. The game controls really well with the Xbox controller, and I love the way that it feels. All of the licensed destinations that were in the original games are still here, like KFC or the Gap. Visually, the game is fine, but it's quite a bit softer than the Dreamcast games. I mean, it's the Xbox, it can't really be helped in that area. Otherwise, it represents the world of Crazy Taxi well, and the areas that were in the first 2 games run at a rock-solid 60 frames per second. There is some extreme slowdown in the Glitter Oasis area, however, especially if you jump. I'm not sure what's going on to cause that. Of course, this game also supports progressive scan, but not widescreen. The sound is kind of a letdown. All of the licensed songs from the first 2 games are here, along with some new ones for the Glitter Oasis area. They sound mostly fine. The voices of all the characters are muffled. Like, extremely muffled. It can be difficult to understand what a lot of them say. That's a big part of the fun, and it's somewhat ruined here because of the severe low-pass filter they seem to have applied for no reason that I can tell. Still, overall, it's a good game, and it's great if you don't have the previous 2 games on any of the other platforms. There are more follow-ups to this next game than there probably should be, but I'll be focusing mainly on just one. The original is amazing though, at least I think so. Blaster Master was an incredible game when it appeared on the NES in 1988 from Sunsoft. The level layout encouraged exploration. Not only that, but you could exit your tank and explore as a little guy and even fight this way as well. If that's not enough, you enter areas that you can only access as a human. These overhead areas are where you'd sometimes find a boss to fight. This title also has outstanding music, which is normal for a Sunsoft game of this time. I think most of us are aware of Blaster Master 2 on the Genesis. This wasn't made by the team in Japan, oh no. Although the graphics are very detailed and colorful, the gameplay just doesn't quite stack up to the original. Also, the music is a huge disappointment, not even in the same solar system, much less the same ballpark as the original. I was expecting so much more of this game and it just did not deliver. Of course, Blaster Master Blasting Again on the PlayStation is a pretty fun game, and it's better than you think it might be. It takes a bit of getting used to, but once you do, it's a fairly entertaining adventure. Even though it's in 3D now, it still works. There would be a few other Blaster Master based games released on the portable systems and whatnot as well. But the one that everyone seems to forget ever existed is Blaster Master Overdrive on the Wii. This one was officially developed by Sunsoft themselves, and it was published by Gaijin Works. Gaijin Works is the second company started by Vic Ireland, who originally founded Working Designs. This game was never released physically. However, it does play very much like the original on the NES, though this one is more of a reboot than a proper sequel. You're not chasing a frog through some caverns this time, but instead you're saving the entire world! Why even bother playing a game unless the stakes are dialed up to 11? No one wants to save a frog, but everyone wants to save the world, right? No? Well, tell that to almost every writer out there. Anyway, the formerly powerful Sophia tank has been stripped down by the enemy, so you need to collect all of the power-ups again. You wander through caverns and the like searching for them. Once again, you can pop out of your tank and run around, but of course your weapon fire here is much less powerful than that of your tank. Once you go inside of an area, it again switches to an overhead view. Here, you basically wander around, defeat enemies, and grab a power-up or two. You have 3 different weapons you can switch between on the fly here. You've got your normal shot, you have a heat-seeking shot, and a nice bomb shot. The bomb shot is the strongest, but it's also the slowest and weirdest to use. You can power up each weapon independently. Unfortunately, when you get hit, the weapon you're using also decreases in power. This wouldn't be an issue if weapon power-ups were more plentiful, but they're pretty scarce. You can strafe just like in the original game, but you need to hold the B trigger underneath the D-pad to do it, which is awkward at best. Oh, and yes, you have to use the Wii remote. You certainly can't use a GameCube controller. You'll eventually find a boss in one of these overhead areas, and the fights are usually fairly long. The good news, though, is that they're also pretty damn fun. Once you defeat a boss, you'll get an upgrade to your tank so you can find the next area. Enemies will take a huge chunk off of your life bar if they touch your tank. You can extend your life bar permanently by finding the right power-ups. Trust me, you'll need these. They are definitely not optional. You can save at the entrance to some of the overhead areas, but not all of them. You can tell which ones have a save point on the map screen. Oh, and you'll be looking at the map quite often. Save points are few and far between, and often not convenient. I still recommend going out of your way to save as often as possible. I really wish each overhead area had a save point. Sadly, the design of the stages themselves tend to be rather boring and don't really change much in the visual department. They mostly have the same rocky yet flat surfaces with just a different hue. Even then, I wouldn't describe anything here as looking fantastic. All of the overhead areas look more or less the same. The biggest sin is that this game is in interlaced mode only, no progressive option at all. Not only that, but there's no widescreen mode either. Apparently, Sunsoft's people weren't very familiar with the Wii. This is another game where you're going to want to set your Wii to 4:3 before you play it in order to get the full horizontal resolution available. The music consists of arrangements from the original game, and they sound okay. In fact, they kind of remind me of playing a MIDI file on the old WinGroove app. Anyone remember WinGroove? Man, that sure takes me back. At the end of the day, though, this game is still pretty fun, even if the design of the map is a bit short-sighted and the graphics lacking, so I recommend giving it a try. Oh wait, you can't unless you bought it back when it was available. The Wii Store closed. Anyway, if you want some good Blaster Master sequels, or reboots as they may be, that are more popular, be sure to check out the Blaster Master Zero series. Rayman was first released on the Atari Jaguar and then on the Saturn and PlayStation in 1995 from Ubisoft. It's a fun 2D platformer with sharp graphics that are also quite colorful. I found the game pretty fun for a short time, but ultimately it didn't hold my attention for more than maybe a week. I never felt compelled to finish it. I still like it for what it was, though. Rayman II: The Great Escape came out in 1999 for the Nintendo 64 and PC, and in 2000 for the PlayStation, Dreamcast, and PlayStation 2. I got it on the Dreamcast, which you're seeing here. I really liked this one and was way more than happy to take the time to finish it. This time, Rayman is in 3D, but the whimsical nature remains and actually works pretty well here. There are a lot of different play mechanics depending on the particular level, and most areas find a way to keep things fun and interesting. For its time, the graphics were super awesome, especially on the Dreamcast. And holy crap, I just realized that this one even has a widescreen mode. And it's truly wider, it's not just cropping the top and bottom, though the setting for it in the options screen seems kind of unintuitive and almost backwards. The music fit the game perfectly as well. Rayman made a great jump to 3D. It's certainly not perfect though, as it could use more control configuration options and the camera was occasionally an issue. I never even knew there was a Rayman 3 until maybe a few years ago. It was initially released in 2003. It was on all the platforms at the time, even portable systems, Mac, and N-Gage, but I must have overlooked it. It didn't help that nobody ever seemed to mention this one, at least not to me. Despite that, it sold decently well, over 1 million copies. Anyway, I'm playing it on the GameCube here, and this is my very first experience with Rayman 3 on any platform. You start without your hands, and you can kick to attack certain enemies or things. It doesn't take long before you get them back though. After that, it controls just like you'd expect Rayman to control, punching things and holding down the punch button for a stronger attack. This time you can find cans, which will contain a specific power-up that you need to advance in that particular area. For example, there's one that gives you the ability to smash open certain doors. You can also curve your punches around objects that are in your way by holding down the R button. This also lets you lock onto the enemy so you can attack them and keep moving around. I welcome this feature. The control in Part 3 is both better and worse. It's much quicker to respond than Rayman 2, and the button mapping makes more sense, but there were times where I felt bad things happened and it wasn't my fault. This mostly occurred with the jumping. The camera manages to be worse than Rayman 2 and it gets in the way quite often. You can center it and you'll find yourself messing with it all the time because it doesn't know what it's doing on its own. The game is extremely linear this time around and there's no hub world or map. I had a really hard time following the story. It's very strange. It's extremely disconnected somehow. It just feels like there are some weird gaps in how the story is presented. The visuals have taken a nice step up here. You get 480p, 60 frames per second, and even a widescreen mode, at least on the GameCube. It all looks quite good. The sound is also good, and the music fits the game, but otherwise it doesn't stand out. There are plenty of voices in here, and even Rayman himself talks now.
Knowing what a scaredy cat he is, he's probably hiding someplace.
When it comes down to it, I think Rayman 2 is the better game. Maybe that's why this one isn't at the forefront of everyone's mind when it comes to 3D Rayman games. It did get released in HD in 2012 on the PS3 and Xbox 360 digitally if you want to try it there. There you go, that was a bunch of sequels that were completely forgotten that now you remember thanks to me. I'm just kidding. Anyway, are there any more sequels that fall into this category? Can you even remember them? I sure can't. Let me know in the meantime. Thank you for watching GameSack. Hi, welcome to my show where I talk about video games. I like video games. For example, here's one. T2. Here's another video game. Tojum and Earl. Dad! Be quiet! This is my video game show. I want to talk about video games, okay? Here's another video game. Dad! Road Rash.
Only children play video games.
Here's another video game.
I'm talking about video games. Only children play video games. Much less collect them.
The Revenge of Shinobi. I like this one a lot.
Come down and beat your ass.
Look, I found $5. I'm wondering where that
Talk about
went.
video games in this house unless it's about him.